Well, thank you, everyone. We have a very, very tight agenda this year since World Water Week went virtual. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I am Brooke Atwell, the Nature Conservancy's Water Funds Program Conservation Strategy and Communications Manager. Today, you'll hear from our panelist, Gilles Kleitz from the French Development Agency, Thomas Skirtis from Conservation International, and Louise Stafford from the Nature Conservancy. All right, we'll be speaking about the components of a good business case and how to develop one for a project that focuses on nature-based solutions for water security. So Gilles will give us a DFI perspective on how they, as a bank, choose NBS projects for investment, and Thomas and Louise will give us a practitioner's perspective on how they're moving through the business case process in both the Cloud Forest Blue Energy Project and the Greater Cape Town Water Fund. So at the session today, we'll be keeping all attendees on mute and off video. So if you do have a question, please type it in the QA function that's at the bottom of your screen. And if you like someone else's question and wanted to see it answered, please give it an upvote as well so it brings it higher up to our attention. To make sure that we're all on the same page before we start moving on to specific use cases, I'm going to give us a really quick primer on the business case process. All right. So the four components that you're seeing on the screen now are sort of the key ingredients, if you will, for your business case. First, you'll want to identify what those potential technical NBS options are that could address your water security challenge. And here we're really focusing on the NBS themselves. For example, if you're struggling with, say, flooding, you might want to consider wetland restoration as an option that you maybe want to look further into during your economic analysis. The economic analysis itself will really help you determine what that optimal portfolio is of nature-based solutions for your particular context. And when we say optimal, we are really referring to the portfolio that can get you the best return for your investment, or in reality, your investors' investment in that project. And once you have a good idea of that portfolio, you'll want to map out the funding you have available to cover the costs of that program. And then you'll want to discern whether or not you have a funding or a financing gap that you need to fill. And lastly, though this is quite very closely intertwined with your funding and financing strategy, you'll want to define what governance and institutional arrangement you need to be able to make decisions about the management of your NBS program. And the arrangement that you choose may have an impact on what sources of funding you can leverage and vice versa. The funding may dictate the type of arrangement you can have as well. So we'll just take 2 minutes to give a really quick primer on components 2 and 3 here before we start with the panelists, because they'll delve most deeply into these components. So the economic analysis. Now, I noted previously on the last slide that it helps you determine your optimal portfolio of NBS interventions and the return on investment for that portfolio. But it's also important to note that during that process, you'll determine a couple other key pieces that'll help for your funding and financing strategy. You'll determine the total cost of that program, what NBS should be prioritized, what kind of maintenance your project will need, and the cost of that maintenance, so on and so forth. However, I think maybe most importantly, you'll be able to succinctly define the benefits and the co-benefits of your NBS program. When those benefits are expected to materialize in the life cycle of your NBS program. Is it at 2 years? Is it at 6 years? Is it at 15 years? And who benefits once they do? You really perform the economic analysis to get a strategic direction for your program and to motivate potential funding commitments down the line. It's also really useful to generate alignment among your stakeholders to get them excited about or support your project. And to actually conduct the process, it's pretty complex and does require some specialized modeling capacity. However, our panelists are going to actually illustrate parts of that process with examples, which I think will be much more helpful and probably more exciting than if I just reviewed the theory myself now. Funding and financing. After the economic analysis, you move on to figure out how you're going to pay for your program. And there are two main buckets here. A simplified way of really differentiating between these sources is you have to pay back financing. Most people are pretty familiar with the home mortgage process, and the underlying concept for financing is pretty similar. You borrow money, you pay it back with a little more. Now, if you're really looking to leverage financing for your project, you should know that there are two common ways that you can generate the funds you need to repay the initial investment. You could either generate more cash flows, or you can hope that your asset that you're investing in will appreciate over time. Cash flows are pretty straightforward. You can either decrease costs or increase revenue. So let's take, for example, perhaps a conventional farm that's employed nature-based solutions to make the transition from a conventional to an organic farm. The products that are now produced from that organic farm, because it has an organic certification, can probably fetch a higher price on the organic market. That's really increasing revenues. On the other hand, because it's now employing nature-based solutions, the farm is less likely to buy as much fertilizer because those nature-based solutions are improving soil health. That's called decreasing costs. Now, the farm itself, as it moves from a conventional to an organic production, in this instance, would be the asset that's actually increased in value, and that is asset appreciation. You could probably sell that farm for a higher price as organic than you could probably fetch as a conventional farm. I do want to note, however, that not all NBS projects may be great candidates for financing, and we'll explore some of those differences with our panelists. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll hand it off to Gila to give us his thoughts as a prospective investor.
Thank you, Brooke. Let me just share my screen. There you go. So good evening, everyone. I'm Gilles Kleis. I'm from the French Development Agency, speaking to you from a public park in France. Actually, I hope the transmission is good. I have a few key messages to put forward to this side event. The first one is that within development banks and public development banks, there is still really a political, political agenda in terms of upscaling and pushing nature-based solutions, especially in the wash sector. So I think one of the key benefits of working out business cases is actually advocating for nature-based solutions and their bankability at the moment still, because we see a lot of public finance institutions not yet convinced of the feasibility, the performance, and the bankability of these solutions. Another key message I want to put forward is that at AFD, we think that for water, as for other areas where you can mobilize nature-based solutions, the convergence between the climate and biodiversity agenda is actually key to push nature-based solutions. It is the area where you have both climate and co-benefits, especially in building your business case and your economic studies, valuing these two types of benefits, both in terms of carbon, in terms of adaptation, and in terms of biodiversity gains and resilience. An ecosystem state is absolutely key. A third third message, as you will see, is that financing nature-based solutions in the water and sanitation sector is already well in place and well developed, and we have a few an interesting and important portfolio. I'll share a few examples with you. And the last message is that there are still a few factors that are hampering the full upscaling of nature-based solutions in the wash sector. One is indeed the precise performance real, actual measured performance of nature-based solutions. The other one is the sort of investment profiles that are needed in different contexts. A third one that we are encountering is the technical capacity of consultancies to sell actually these solutions with our counterparts, such as municipalities or industries or national water operators. This brings me to another factor, limiting factor, which is the demand side, where there is a lot of advocacy to be made, especially I'm thinking of African context, where nature-based solutions are still seen as not worthy of investments by foreign aid money, probably for different reasons, one of them being visibility, reliability, experience, and so on. I will pass on presenting AFD, just to let you know that AFD is funding a bit over 1 billion in watershed and sanitation sector every year. We work in about 110 countries. And water resilience is for us a key subject, especially in the Middle East, Mediterranean, and Sahelian countries, where we work quite a lot on these subjects. Let me tell you a bit very briefly on the work we do on the convergence between climate and biodiversity nexus as the main engine, the main motivation for nature-based solution. As you know, ecosystem and climate is interlinked, and when we look at justification in project evaluation, justification of nature-based solutions, especially in the watershed sector, basically looking at both climate performance and biodiversity performance is absolutely key, and has pushed us to develop a lot of nature-based solution in the water sector. Basically, if you use this convergence between nature-based solutions and for climate, the overall the overall efforts by other types of mitigation is decreased in a large part. Oops, what's happening? There you go. At the moment, nature climate solutions are considered as 30% of the solution for the climate crisis and receive only 2% of climate funding. And therefore, we are really strongly pushing the case for more nature-based solutions within our activities, and that's why we have committed at AFD that 30% of all our climate finance should be actually based on nature-based solutions, which means that we need to develop NBS in the water and sanitation sector, as well as agroecology, as well as green infrastructure and green cities, etc. But I just wanted to push this point because this is one very strong argument for nature-based solutions and developing their economic model. This is just a model of how we account for these mutual co-benefits between biodiversity and climate. I won't go into detail. Just to give you a few examples of how we want to further develop or nature-based solutions at AFD, especially in the wash sector. We have actually funded and are now basing our approaches on the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions, who was presented this July. This is a work that was done in the last sort of 6 months, and it's based on 8 criteria to define what are nature-based solutions, and I think it's important to look at them when setting up and looking at water and sanitation nature-based solutions. They include, of course, social aspects. They include indeed biodiversity gains. They include adaptative gains and balancing general trade-offs. I won't go into detail, but just to say that when we assess proposal from nature-based solutions, we are now going to use these standards who are being developed, and I think it's important to say, because in the last 2 or 3 years, what lied behind nature-based solutions was still pretty open. Here are a few examples of what we are doing. I would like to stress that there's no such thing as a pure nature-based solutions. Usually we have an integrated approach between gray infrastructure and green infrastructure, and this is true especially in space-constrained areas, such as urban area. Here you have a picture of a reed bed filter and tertiary step for wastewater treatment plant in Palestine, where spatial constraints are key, and you have to combine the effectiveness of recreated ecosystems with a gray infrastructure. Basically, you as well, in terms of watershed management, this is a classical example of replanting trees, improving soil, improving water storage capacity of soils, and as well with strong social dimensions, which as a donor, and we will always be looking at multiple co-benefits between climate, biodiversity, social issue, employment, and the capacity to actually of these nature-based solutions in the water sector to actually create jobs at watershed level, for example. One last example here in the Republic of Congo on the types of anti-erosion aspects, where we are using as well afforestation and reforestation with a lot of education and community participation, which we had to really calculate an economic model to justify other more gray and infrastructure solutions. Just to finish on the key constraints, I think one of which is one of the maybe key area of this this session and sharing here. I think I was talking to you about the difficulty of selling nature-based solutions still in many cases, and one of them is because of the sort of classical market failures of not recognizing the many values and co-benefits of nature. So I think when you look as a financer, as a bank, at the investment profile and how costs, investments, profits are spread over time, there are key differences between a gray infrastructure and between a natural infrastructure. And this is really key to understand through a number of case studies and by digging into the existing data on how your nature-based solution is a, I mean, what sort of finance need and sort of cash flow is going to have over time, so that you do really understand the economic model of this alternative that you are, or that as a funder we are going to be to have to sell basically to the counterparts, especially if it's the borrower and if we have to lend money. So usually with gray infrastructure, you'll have a very strong investment. You'll have, benefits that are going to accrue quite rapidly, and then standard sort of restoration cost along a long period of years, and the benefits are going to basically slowly grow and become, and the whole infrastructure is going to be profitable over quite a rapid initial period. If you compare the sort of cost effectiveness of some nature-based solution, the pricing distortion and barriers, especially the lack of accounting for nature's co-benefits, will mean that when you present this to a Ministry of Finance or and so on, you will constantly have to argue for valuing these co-benefits at first. But generally, what we find as a DFI is that nature-based solutions usually justify a lower investment at first. There are more uncertainties in terms of the performance in reality. There's more need to monitor and so on. There's more ability to actually engage local communities in terms of maintenance and operational costs than a gray and more technical infrastructure, which is on a development side quite an advantage, but needs to be advocated, really needs to be really put forward. Overall, the general co-benefits, if you are able to actually quantify them, and if you can really sell that point, then obviously the overall economic model of no nature-based solution is very advantageous and actually a good selling point. But the reality with our counterparts in developing countries, and especially least advanced countries, is that the possibility to actually sell these co-benefits, value them, and put emphasis on them is quite difficult, because people will not look at that. One of the key difficulties we have as well is that your counterpart and your operator could be quite different between a technology-based solution and a nature-based solution. This is as well a key aspect to look at. But in general, as you see, we as a bilateral development bank, we do believe that there is huge potential to develop nature-based solutions. There is a strong need to produce more data on the technical performance, social performance, and obviously environmental performance of nature-based solutions, especially in the water and sanitation sector, which is one of the high potential for developing nature-based solutions altogether. At the moment, it does constitute, if we have a broad definition, nearly about 10% of the 1.3 billion that I was telling you about. We invest in nature-based solutions, in water sanitation. So altogether, a message of encouragement, a message that we need to produce good references for the performance of the nature-based solutions in water and sanitation sector as well as other sectors. And given that, I think a lot of DFIs will be really ready to upscale nature-based solutions for their multiple co-benefits, for their bankability, for their better social integration, I would say, and especially as a biodiversity activist for their nature co-benefits, obviously. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gilles. That's actually a great transition, because Thomas and Louise will talk about how in their project design, they have tried to address some of those challenges that you do bring up. So Thomas, I will toss it over to you, and Jill, if you could stop sharing your screen, Thomas can go ahead and do his presentation.
Thank you, Brooke, and thank you, Gilles, for this great presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. Thomas Curtis here. I am with Conservation International and the Nature Conservancy, based in Bogota. Please let me know when you can see my screen, and I'll start.
I can see it.
Okay, great. So I will share with you guys the experience of a project that's called Blue Energy, which really tries to value the ecosystem services that forests and other ecosystems can provide to the hydropower sector. We try to have an innovative financial scheme to attract investments and to finance conservation activities. So that's what we are going to share today. I would like to make a disclaimer that we are in the process of setting up this project. We have not reached financial close, and all what I'm going to present today is hopefully hopefully the key ingredients to reach financial close. And time will tell if we were right. But I think most of all, I want to share with you guys the questions that one has to have in mind when setting up a nature-based solution transaction. Okay, so, well, the main question for us was how to engage key stakeholders in conservation activities. And in countries depending heavily on hydroelectricity, obviously hydropower companies are key stakeholders for watershed conservation. And when you think about ecosystem services for hydropower companies, two things come to mind immediately: sedimentation control and water flow regulation. These two ecosystem services, we believe, can generate sufficient cash flow for an attractive transaction because they can influence a variety of things. Erosion control can reduce O&M costs, can also increase the reservoir's lifespan, which is key. And also water regulation can optimize the electricity production, mainly by shifting, by increasing the water flow during the dry season where typically prices are higher. First step is to really understand how nature can benefit your stakeholders. In our cases, we do think that forests can really bring financial benefits to hydropower companies. And so then once you identify how nature can be of benefit to your counterpart, then the question is, how do you make these ecosystem services even more attractive? And in the case of hydropower companies, how to engage them further from what they are typically doing, which is complying with regulatory obligations or working in the immediate surroundings of the reservoirs. Hydropower companies that we've met more than 15 companies in 4 countries. They are all very interested in conserving their watersheds, obviously, but they are not willing to make the upfront investment for that. Not always in the right proportions anyway. So we try to set up a scheme, financial scheme, where the hydropower company is not at the center. We are not knocking at their door and telling them, look, you need to invest in the watershed conservation, give us money and we'll take care of things. We try to use a scheme that is inspired by project finance transactions, where you set up an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, that will carry the project. We'll be looking for financing of conservation and restoration activities. These activities will be implemented by local communities, and hopefully these activities will produce ecosystem services that the hydropower company will buy. So the hydropower company becomes an off-taker of ecosystem services and pays for that, for part of it at least. And this flow of revenues should be enough to provide financial return to the equity and debt investors, and also finance the restoration and conservation activities. And by doing so, we really noticed that we increased the attractiveness of the willingness of companies to get involved. And from the 15 companies we've met, all of them were interested in this type of transaction because they didn't need to make upfront investments, and that becomes very attractive to them. So once you have the hydropower company interest, then you need to be, most of all, credible, right, and answer the key questions. And credibility and trust really are the two. For ecosystem services, I believe that credibility and trust are first and foremost built around a robust biophysical model, how you model ecosystem services and how you represent really what is going on in the watershed. So biophysical modeling is at the core of building the business case for nature. In our case, we decided to develop our own model to answer really two of the main questions that we have from the companies. It's not only how much benefits can I expect from nature, but it's also when. And this when is very important. And in Jill's presentation, we've seen that nature takes time to provide benefits. And so when can we expect that? And it's key for the whole structuring of the transaction, for modeling the cash flows, etc. But modeling is not only about the biophysical processes, it's also about understanding the local social and economical dynamics. You want to understand what is the cost of implementation, what is the opportunity cost, and also what is the how feasible is the project that you are going to implement. And in our case, we try to approximate that by studying governance locally and identifying places where the governance is good enough for a project to be successfully implemented. Also, to be credible, you need to set a price on the ecosystem services, right? And it's interesting to notice in the case of the hydropower companies that we've talked to, we have 2 pilots selected here in Colombia. And it's amazing, these large companies and key assets in Colombia don't know exactly how much sedimentation costs to them. They cannot put a price on a ton of sediment. They have their costs, but they have not made the exercise of putting it all together in order to have a metric that can be used for a financial modeling of the ecosystem services. So price discovery is a process that is very interesting, not only to build the financial model, but also to build trust with the company so that the end result is a number that's agreed by all parties and that can be the foundation for the payments. And all these 3 components should translate into a robust financial model that represents all the processes, the biophysical processes, but also the implementation costs, etc. And that can provide the answers to the financiers in terms of return, project financial viability, and expected returns for equity and debt investors. Also, one thing that is key, in my opinion, is really understanding the risk perception of the key stakeholders. In our case, I wanted to focus on 2 things. First, the hydropower company, and 2, the financiers. Obviously, if you want to engage these stakeholders, you have to understand how they perceive the risk of the project. For the hydropower company, it's mainly implementation. When and how much are you going to implement? And how this implementation translates into ecosystem services, and how do you measure these ecosystem services? For financiers, obviously, same preoccupation in terms of implementation, but it's also, they are going also to focus on costs, your ability to implement within the timeline that you have proposed, but also within the cost, the budget that you have proposed. Now going to focus on operational risks, and the materialization of the ecosystem services, and on other type of considerations such as off-taker credit risk, because in a project finance transaction, obviously everything depends on the off-taker's willingness to pay and capacity to pay, and other considerations such as currency risk and political risks. So once you understand all of that, you can set up a transaction that hopefully can answer or can mitigate all these risks so that these stakeholders are willing to get into this type of transaction and have expectations in terms of return that are compatible with what green infrastructure can provide. Also, I think I'm stating the obvious here, but it's important to talk about local communities, right? Working with local communities and having a plan for how you are going to implement the project is not per se, I think, and Gio could elaborate on that, it's not per se something that is essential for financial closing, but you will need to prove in any case that you are able to implement successfully on the ground first. And also, I think we want to go beyond just proving that the business case is robust. We want to implement, we want to have impact. So if you're not ahead of time thinking about the local communities you are going to work with, then the project is doomed to failure. And so how do you build local community buy-in in the project? How do you ensure long-term, long-lasting impacts? It's through these points that I've set up here. They need to get ownership of the project, understanding the issue at stake and why their involvement is key to solving the issue. Also, you want to co-design the project with local communities. It's the only way to guarantee that implementation will occur, that you set up, and it ties in with point number 3, ties in with the need to set up appropriate conservation and restoration activities that are impactful for nature, but also in line with communities' needs on the ground. You need obviously strong financial and non-financial incentives for these activities to be implemented and to be maintained over time. And eventually you need strong conservation agreements with clear rules so that if things do not go as expected, you can have some way to correct that and incentivize communities to act as they committed to. On top of what I've just said, I did not touch base on communication. It's obviously something that is very important to be able to communicate to all the stakeholders, and if the project needs government support, for example, it's very key that this component is taken in consideration. But here I wanted to kind of stress the considerations that one should have in mind when building a pay for success project. And these are the questions that we are facing now with Blue Energy, and I thought that it was interesting to share it with you guys. First is the definition of success. How do you define success? Is success the implementation? That could be one definition. You implement, you know that implementation will have an impact. So that could be one definition, but also success could be a measured result. But where? Is it measured at implementation level, at the sub-watershed level? Is it measured in the case of the hydropower companies at the production point? So all of these are not trivial questions, and obviously here the interests from the various stakeholders, the implementation agent and the off-taker, the interests are not aligned at all. So you have to find a middle ground between these two approaches to have a definition of success that is fine with everyone. Also, how do you measure success? Obviously, modeling is important, as I said. You can base your measure of success on model results, but the hydropower companies can be willing to just measure success by real measures, right? But how do you do that? You often don't have a baseline to compare results to. You can choose to set up, for example, a control sub-watershed where you can compare the results of of your portfolio of activities with another control watershed, but you have to take into consideration costs of doing that, and also the limitation it imposes on the area of intervention of the project. Other considerations, these are more financial, is how do you set up a project where you typically in nature-based solutions, purely nature-based solutions, you don't have collateral, right? Financiers won't go ahead and cut trees if the SPV does not repay its debt, hopefully not. This might require additional cash flow generation to set up debt service reserve accounts, for example. And other limitations or challenges, I should say, in this type of transaction is that there is no step-in rights. For those who are familiar with project finance, a step-in rights is the ability for the financier to go ahead and take control and, for example, replace the implementation agent if it does not work well. Well, in this case, the implementation agent, it's the communities. You are not going to take them away, and you are not going to be able to work in their territory without their consent. So it's critical that you really set up this work with the local communities in a way that is satisfactory for and that provides comfort to the financiers, because there's no other option. So I'm going to stop now. I hope that this presentation provided some guidance on the ingredients of the recipe for success. It brings more questions than answers, but every project is different, and I think the important thing is to ask the right question. And to conclude, I just would like to say that the more I work on these type of projects, the more I'm convinced that building the business case for nature is not about just one or two ecosystem services. It's really about having a landscape approach where you can identify all the ecosystem services that the ecosystem can provide, and all the stakeholders, the potential beneficiaries of these ecosystem services. So in our case, we decided to focus on sedimentation and water flow regulation, but we will have to put in carbon or any other ecosystem services that make sense for the project to be financially viable, because just focusing on one ecosystem services might not do it in terms of financial viability. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Thomas. I'm going to turn it over to Louise Stafford when Thomas is finished. Oh, thank you for sharing his screen. And I'll just make a quick plug for everyone who's asking questions. Please do, if you feel brave enough to ask them publicly, make them available to everyone else. I'm happy to answer all of your private questions, but others may have the same ones. So making that quick plug, and Louise, take it away.
Thank you, Brooke, and good evening or good day and good afternoon to everybody who took the time to join this session. I'm Louise Stafford, the Director for Source Water Protection of the Nature Conservancy in South Africa, and I'm going to share with you how we worked with other actors in the basin when we built the business case and financial model for the Greater Cape Town Water Fund. Cape Town is the second largest city in South Africa. It has a fast-growing population. Currently, the population is 4.6 million people. It grows at the rate of about 2.4% annually. So it was predicted that the water demand would outstrip the supply by 2021. And to avoid this situation, the city of Cape Town started putting measures in place such as water demand management, upgrading water infrastructure, and they also considered other options to augment the water supply. Cape Town receives its water through a very integrated and complex supply system, the Western Cape Water Supply System, and it consists of multiple big dams or reservoirs, pipelines, and canals. In 2016, the City of Cape Town and the Nature Conservancy entered into a memorandum of understanding and to develop a water fund for Cape Town. But in 2016 was also very significant in the sense that the region was in the middle of a very severe 3-year drought, considered by many as the worst in 100 years. And this was the largest of the supply dams in the Western Cape Water Supply System, the Theewaterskloof Dam. And this is the stage early in 2018 at the height of the drought where Cape Town faced a day zero where the taps would run dry and more than 4 million people will have to queue every day for their water supply. Now, at this stage, we were busy developing the business case and making the case for nature-based solutions. And you can imagine if you're the utility manager and you have 4 million people looking at you for water and somebody come and say, but nature can help, then, you know, they may question the assumption. The augmentation options that the city considered to avoid the situation where the water would run out by 2021 included desalination, water reuse, increased capacity. Nature-based solutions at that stage was mentioned briefly, but there were no clear actions and plans in place to pursue that. At least there was recognition at that stage that it is an option. So the Greater Cape Town business case was launched in November of 2018. The picture that you just saw of the dry dam is in April 2018. So there were some winter rains, and the business case we looked at the problem and identified 7 priority sub-watersheds where nature-based solutions can deliver the highest return on investment. And we compared that with the other options that the city was considered at that time, such as water desalination, seawater desalination, groundwater exploration, water reuse, and increasing capacity. And in fact, it showed that nature-based solutions is 1/10 of the cost for the same amount of water of any of the other options that was considered by the city. The impact of invasive trees on the catchments in the Greater Cape Town region is severe. During the drought and during winter or dry, we in a winter rainfall area, and the invasive trees do the most damage during the dry summer seasons when it's low flows and you need that trickle going into the dams. And if the catchments are invaded, the water don't reach the dams. The region at the current status loses 55 million cubic meters of water every year as a result of alien plants. And you can see on the picture on the left-hand side, the green that you see there is invasive pines that takes over the catchments. 2/3 of Cape Town's catchments are invaded by alien plants. And this equates to 2 months water supply for Cape Town. And if nothing is done, the problem will double in just 20 years. So there's knowledge about the problem, and there's also a lot of actions that's happening, but the studies and the information has shown that despite all the knowledge and despite the current actions with multiple role players, the problem is deteriorating, and there's not really good insights in where the turning point would be. And studies in South Africa have shown, and for Cape Town, it has shown, if you hear the figure 600 billion rand over a 100-year period, that's what it will cost to bring the invasive plant problem under control in the catchments. Then you start thinking, maybe I should bet I'm closer to retirement than in 100 years when I won't be here, and rather start planning for retirement than start thinking about this massive scheme and there's no end in sight. And I think that's one of the reasons, because we thought at such a very large scale, that we struggled to get the problem under control. So it's against this background that we started developing the business case and produced the business case. And during that process, engaging with the different stakeholders in the region. So the first thing we asked is who should be involved. So we looked at who's already involved. It's nature conservation organizations, it's national government, it's provincial, it's local government. We looked at the academic institutions, researchers, and we all and NGOs and the private sector, and started engaging with them. And what was critical for us is to also identify the key individuals that, like Professor van Wilgen here in this picture, who spent 40 years looking at the impact of invasive plants, propagating what should happen. And if one don't check in with individuals such as Professor van Wilgen, and the business cases delivered, and they question some of the assumptions, it cast a shadow over that business case. So we went to great lengths to fact check with experts such as Professor van Wilgen and many others. So we also set up an interim governance committee, and water funds are innovative funding and governance mechanisms. And during the development of the business case, we established a steering committee that was representative of the government stakeholders, the Conservation Agency, the City of Cape Town, and the private sector that we brought on board right from the start, and also other NGOs such as WWF. The Nature Conservancy acts as a secretariat, and there were also 3 specialist working groups, the operations and data working group, because we needed data to develop the business case, the monitoring evaluation working group, and the funding working group to help us figure out where the funding will come from and what the different scenarios could be. Then we engaged the stakeholders through multiple workshops. We collected and collated information because we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, but we had to look at what's available, what's the quality of that information, and just try and fill the gaps with the waterfront studies. We also wanted to know who's already doing what, because as I said, there was a lot of activities, and we're looking at filling the gaps. We had to understand the mandates and the concerns and the desires of the different stakeholders. For example, when we just started talking about the business case, one of our private sector partners said to me, just don't come and talk about invasive trees. We want to get the water in the dams, and we are willing to pay for pipes to transport the water and get reuse systems up and running. So I had to then say, but this is about nature-based solutions and not about pipes. But they fortunately agreed to not leave us at that stage, but to work to see how the process developed. We did fact checking, as I said, and we had expert workshops, and we also had used the media to say what is nature-based solutions and what the benefits of nature-based solutions are for the different users. And if we expect the city and the government to maintain the gain of the different interventions, and ratepayer funding money will be used to invest in nature-based solutions, at least the ratepayers in the city will understand what it's about, and one doesn't have to convince them in the end, but take them along with the journey. So it's all about the messaging and the media that one uses to reach as many stakeholders as possible and take them along. So then during the expert working group meetings, we identified the problem. We asked ourselves, what is wrong? And we came up with a long list of what is wrong. And then we said, now, where do we want to be? And collectively, we decided on a vision of a healthy and resilient catchment that provides sustainable water yields for current and future generations. And then we went back and we tracked, how are we going to get to this ideal desired state? That was the theory of change that was adopted by the group. We developed the decision support system, which is a flexible, transparent, user-friendly system. It's available online, and you can see the link at the bottom. Feel free to visit it. And this decision support system tracks progress against targets. It coordinates the field activities. It's visual. Stakeholders can see it. Our donors can see it. We could see where we're planning to work and how we're doing against the targets and validate the benefits. And something that we find right in the beginning is a lack of good quality data. And the flexibility, but we still developed the business case with the best available information that we had at that stage. But the positive or the beauty of this system is that it can be updated. So it serves as this adaptive management tool. Then we had to ask, but where's the funding going to come from? So we looked at who already works in those the areas prioritized in the business case for the highest return on investment. And we looked at different scenarios, the business as usual. The current status is the business as usual. The current status is the different stakeholders or work in the catchments and clear invasive plants at the space that was current, and it was very much a stop-start situation where there wasn't enough funding to predict future investment, and it was also fragmented. So then we put targets out, and we know that we have to clear 54,300 hectares in 6 years if we want to change the situation where we turn the water losses into water gains. And we started counting in 2019, our first year of implementation. Just before the COVID lockdown, we had to unfortunately stop. So we know for this new financial year, we have a bit extra to do. And if we catch up, we can systematically clear the 9,000 new hectares. But it's important to follow up the areas that we cleared. So the private sector helped us over this first short-term or 6-year high impact phase, and then government steps in and maintain the long-term gain by keeping the invasive, the catchments free of invasives. And the high impact phase is the most costly because that's that dense infestations where machinery is needed and many people is needed to bring it under control.
2 minutes,
so
Louise.
When we went and we divided the catchments up into which of the partners will take responsibility for each of the sub-catchments, and we monitor the impacts. We monitor the impacts on biodiversity, on water, and on job creation and the socio-economic impacts, and then also the management effectiveness. So the value what the Water Fund brought to the region was that we quantified the problem, we prioritized, we did the economic assessment, have a return on investment, and we changed that 600 billion over 100 years to 372 million in 30 years with 260 million over the first 6 years. And this is how we're going to get there. We involved the private sector. We had smart objectives, specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-bound. And we had the theory of change, and it was demonstrating. Started off with a small team of 10 women. We focused We brought on board the private sector and government buy-in, and we scale the operation to where we're now working in the priority areas with 260 jobs that's created so far. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Louise. All right, so Gilles' computer died. That is the downside of working and taking a call in a beautiful park. But we do have a number of questions and answers that have either been asked directly to me or have been already answered. So I'll work with our panelists to answer some of those. And if you go to the World Water Week session page, that's where we'll upload the extended Q&A and the recording of this session as well. I'm also putting my email in the chat should you have any additional questions or want to hear more about what's been discussed today. Thank you all so much for joining, and thank you so much to our panelists for providing their insights.